The Bob Harden Show. And now here's your host, Bob Harden.
Thanks so much for joining us here on the show. It's brought to you in part by Florida Weekly, your complimentary copy available at hundreds of locations throughout the Paradise Coast, as well as the Foundation for Government Accountability. I proudly serve on their board, and I encourage you to visit the very robust website, thefga.org. Right now we have with us Dan Peterson. He's the head of the director of the Center for Property Rights at the James Madison Institute, a terrific organization. Dan, thank you so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Dan, and for listeners that may not be familiar with the James Madison Institute, maybe you could tell us about it.
Sure. We're a free market think tank and institute located in Tallahassee, Florida. It's, I think, Florida's oldest such a large think tank. And we try to speak out on issues that we would consider to be good public policy, especially those that would drive public policy decision-making into the free market, where
right.
people can make good choices on things. And so it's a real privilege. We have a Center for Property Rights, which I direct. We have a Center for Education, for good government policies, and a number of other things. And so we do research, we write papers. We have a great website at jamesmadison.org where all of our information can be found, including the paper we're discussing this morning.
Absolutely, and I would say James Madison Institute, JMI, or it's jamesmadison.org, is it not?
JamesMadison.org, yes.
JamesMadison.org is the website. On my short list for information, go-to website for information about how to respond and think about some of the complex things that are going on in terms of the Florida legislature and Florida policy. Now, one of them, of course, is this Everglades, and you've written a paper, and I think I've got it right, Solving the Everglades Riddle. Maybe you could tell us about it.
I'd be glad to. You know, ever since I've moved to Florida, I've heard stories about the need for the restoration of the Everglades, and pretty much all I'd heard about were the problems and the issues revolving it. And just really a few years ago, I got interested in it because I thought, I just want to know for myself, what is the problem here?
Mm-hmm.
And James Madison Institute, because we promote good public policy, we're very concerned about our environment because we think it's good public policy to take care of the environment. The other side to that, though, is we also think it's good use, or it's good public policy to make the best use of tax dollars. And there's just limited numbers of tax dollars that can be used, especially in regard to the remedies and the issues, how to fix the Everglades. And so I began to look into these issues myself. I read a lot of reports. I toured the Everglades. I talked to a lot of people. And so this paper is sort of the summary of what I found out about the Everglades.
Yeah, so I saw a short video. I think it's a couple of minutes long, well worth watching. I would guess, and I'm not looking at the website jamesmadison.org right now, but I would suggest our listeners go there and watch this short video. The general notion here is that apparently environmentalists prefer to just buy up more and more land for government ownership than face some of the real issues.
Well, and that seems to be true, and that's one of the reasons, even in the Amendment 1 issue from a couple of years ago, because Amendment 1 proponents were talking about approving Amendment 1 so that we could get all of this money together and buy more land. Mm. And as I did research, I found out that 27% of Florida is already owned by government strictly for conservation purposes, and there's another 2 to 3%, that are government facilities, things like that. Mm-hmm. So I thought, government already owns a third of our state nearly, mm-hmm. and do we really need to buy conservation lands or more lands? And, if we need to, and science shows it, I'm all for it.
Right.
But it just seemed to be a shopping spree sometimes for the buying of land. And Amendment 1 said, we can use the Amendment 1 money for the acquisition of property, but it also said we need to we can spend that money for the maintenance of property. And, maintaining land is a big expense. You have to hire people to do it. You have to buy the equipment to do it. Mm-hmm. But it also specifically says the restoration of the Everglades. And so Amendment 1 money is a good use of our funds to restore the Everglades.
So let me ask you probably a stupid question. Why is restoring the Everglades important to us?
Well, one of the things I found out in my study was that the Everglades ecosystem is absolutely a huge system. It starts south of Orlando, and it goes all the way south through Florida. And so, many would call it a national heritage. Today, I would say the Everglades is from what I've seen, is about half of the size of what it used to be. But it's an important part of our state. It's a place where ecologies can be studied. It's a place where tourism can take place. Boating and fishing in our state are huge draws for tourists to come down here. And so, it's worthy of being protected as part of our heritage. Mm-hmm. But the means by protecting it are the ones that are obviously in the news today and are so controversial.
Yeah. So, what is the James Madison? What is your recommendation? What are your thoughts with regard to solving the Everglades riddle?
Well, our paper divides the Everglades into 5 major regions because it's so very large and complex. And when you look at the different regions, we find that there are different issues and potentially different solutions. The most acute issue right now is the effect of the water that is being flushed out of Lake Okeechobee over to the Port St. Lucie Stewart area to the east of the St. Lucie River and St. Lucie River estuary. And then water is relieved out to the west towards Fort Myers on the Caloosahatchee River. I think most people don't understand. A dike was built around Lake Okeechobee in the 1930s in order to prevent flooding that had killed lots of people back in the 20s. But the dike is old. It needs to be reinforced. And the Army Corps of Engineers built and controlled the use of that dike. When the dike gets to a certain level of water depth, they are required by the federal government to release water out of these canals east and west so that it doesn't erode the dike and cause it to have a catastrophic flood.
Right.
And there's no way around that. But the people to the east and the west pay the price because when all of that fresh water, which a lot of times has a lot of phosphorus in it, when all of that fresh water hits brackish water or salt water, it can create these terrific or horrific, I would even say, algae blooms that not only affect marine life and plant life in the water, but of course, the tourists don't want to come and swim in that. So it's a tremendous economic hit as well.
All right. So, and in fact, we're seeing that right now on the west coast of Florida. It's down to, I believe, Cape Coral and heading south. So we're hopeful that it, just looking out at our self-interest, it'll stay up there. But it's a real big problem. So what can we do to? I should let you continue with. That's one of the 5 areas.
Well, and one of the big points of controversy is, okay, what can we do to keep the dike in good shape but not flood all of these other areas with this nutrient-rich water? And so in my studies, the experts that I have had a chance to talk to and the best studies that I have read on this say what ought to be done is north of the lake, let's create and construct huge reservoirs so that before all the excess water even gets to Lake Okeechobee, it could be captured and cleansed and then sent south to the Everglades. And I liken it to this. There are those advocates who say, no, let's send the water south and let's try to store it down there. But we're sending it closer to the Everglades when we do that. Mm-hmm. And the illustration that I try to explain to people is, if I walk into my home and I walk into my kitchen and my sink is about to overflow with water because water is running, do I take the time to cut another faucet in the bottom of the sink and drain water out, or do I stop the water at its source if I can?
Yeah.
And I think that's analogous to what we can do for Lake Okeechobee, using reservoirs and other means of limiting the amount of excess water that will flow into Lake Okeechobee. And the same things could be done actually to the east and the west between Lake Okeechobee and the estuaries. Reservoirs could also be built there.
Yeah. Dan, it's pretty clear that this issue is way large, much bigger than we can actually sort through here on the show today. I'm hopeful that you'll come back next week and we can talk further about this and take a look at the overview of what's really happening with regard to the Everglades. Dan, I genuinely appreciate you coming on the show. Again, solving the Everglades riddle. Dan Peterson with the James Madison Institute. Visit jamesmadison.org to find out more. Dan, thank you so much for joining us here on the show.
My pleasure, Bob. Thank you.
My pleasure indeed. Well, that's a wrap here on today's show.